Montana Territory, 1887. The wind howled over the Judith Basin as the stagecoach doors creaked open, and Katherine Prescott's boots hit dry earth for the first time in 4 days. She stepped down onto the cracked ground outside the town of Dry Creek, her gloved hands trembling as they clutched the worn letter that had brought her here. The ink had faded, but the words still burned in her mind. "I'll provide. I'll protect. You'll never want for anything." It had been signed by Silas Thatcher, a rancher with land and livestock, looking for a wife. A mail-order bride, that was what she had agreed to be. Katherine's heart pounded beneath her corset. She was 22, alone, and had nothing of worth except her mother's locket and a name she prayed would be remembered kindly when this was all over. A man stood waiting by the horse post, tall and broad, with a face like carved stone. Silas. He did not smile. Instead, he gave her a once-over with a cold eye and said flatly, "You took your time. I came as soon as the stage allowed," she said, voice steady though her hands ached from gripping the seat rail for too long. "Come on then," he said. "No use standing there like a fool." He turned without another word, leaving her to lift her own bag. The ride to his ranch was quiet and jarring. His wagon smelled of old tobacco and dust. The land stretched out in brittle browns and golds, dry and lonesome. When they reached the Thatcher ranch, Katherine's breath caught. The house was large, yes, but unkempt. The fence posts leaned like tired men. The windows were smeared with dirt and dark inside. "Where is everyone?" she asked. Silas jumped down and tied the reins. "Ran off. Could not take the work." He did not help her down. Inside, the house was cold. The hearth was dead, and the floorboards groaned under her boots. "You'll handle the meals, the washing, and whatever else needs doing," Silas said. "I do not believe in laziness." "I did not come here to be lazy," she answered, looking him in the eye. That earned her a grunt. The next few days bled together. Silas was gone from sunup to sundown, working cattle or riding fence lines. When he returned, he barked orders or ignored her altogether. He never asked about her life before, never told her anything about his, and he never touched her. Not a hand on her arm, not a word of kindness. By the end of the first week, bruises bloomed on her arms where he'd grabbed her to move her aside. He had not struck her, not quite, but the threat hung in the air like a coiled rope. On the 9th morning, she stood over the stove, flipping cornbread in silence, when the sound of hooves came up the drive. She peeked out the window and saw a man on a chestnut gelding, coming in from the east trail. He rode easy like he belonged to the land. Silas muttered, "Damn him," and went out onto the porch, slamming the door behind him. Katherine wiped her hands and went to the window. The rider dismounted, tall and sun-browned, with sandy hair under his hat. He looked younger than Silas, maybe 28. His shirt was dusty, his boots well worn. The moment he looked up toward the house, their eyes met and held. Her breath caught. The man said something to Silas, low and firm. Silas's shoulders squared. His voice rose, harsh and sharp. The cowboy did not flinch. After a minute, Silas spat in the dirt and turned away. The cowboy looked back toward the house once, just once, then mounted and rode off. That night, Katherine asked, "Who was that?" Silas scowled. "No one you need to worry about." But she did worry. She thought about him when she lay in the cold bed alone. Thought about the look in his eyes, steady. Sure, not cruel. 2 days later, she saw him again. She had been hanging linens behind the house when the hoofbeats came. She turned to see him riding along the fence line, not toward the house, but near enough to see her. He tipped his hat. She hesitated, then lifted her hand in return. That evening, Silas came home reeking of whiskey. He threw his gloves on the table and slammed his plate when the stew was not hot enough. He grabbed her wrist when she reached to take it. You do not wave to other men, he hissed. You're hurting me. He let go, but his eyes were hard. After he staggered into bed, Katherine sat on the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around herself. The stars were sharp and clear in the cold air. Are you all right? She turned fast. The cowboy stood in the shadows by the fence, hands at his sides, not moving closer. Katherine blinked hard. You should not be here. I saw what he did. She stood. If he sees you, I will not stay long, he said. Just wanted to be sure you were not alone in this. I am alone. He stepped forward one pace. You do not have to be. She looked at him then, really looked. He was tall, sunburned, with a scar down one side of his neck. His eyes were soft, but there was something strong behind them, something rooted. What is your name? She asked. Hayden McAllister. She swallowed. Katherine Prescott. I know, he said quietly. I asked around. Why? He hesitated. Because I saw you the first day you arrived, and I could tell you did not belong here. I have nowhere else. He looked at her a long beat. Come with me. Her breath caught. What? Come with me. You do not belong with him. I have a place out west of the ridge. Small cabin. Water from the creek. It is not much, but it is safe. You can leave now. She stared at him. Her heart beat loud in her ears. I cannot just. You can, he said, voice low. You just have to want to. Silence stretched between them. Then, from inside, a floorboard creaked. Hayden stepped back into the dark. I will be riding past again tomorrow, he said. After sunup. Then he was gone. Katherine stood there in the cold a long time, her hands clenched to stop their shaking, her eyes fixed on the empty road where he had disappeared. And in her chest, something began to burn. Quiet but strong. Hope. Before the sun crested over the rim of the basin, Katherine packed what she could: her mother's locket, the worn-handled brush, 3 dresses folded tight around a bundle of underthings, and half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She moved with care, her steps light on the boards. Silas's breathing was heavy behind the bedroom door. The whiskey bottle by the hearth sat drained and tipped on its side. She left the cabin without a sound. The morning air scraped her lungs, dry and sharp. Frost clung to the porch rail, catching the blue edge of dawn. Her boots sank into the brittle grass as she moved west, past the barn where the mule stood blinking slow and dumb in its stall. She did not take it. The mule belonged to Silas. She would not take anything of his. She walked. The sun had begun to warm the hills by the time she reached the cottonwoods. A soft wind stirred the tall grass, and 2 meadowlarks chased each other through the reeds. Her legs ached, and her palms stung from where the bag strap had rubbed raw. But she kept walking, the trees growing thicker around her, until the sound of hooves reached her again. He came from behind a rise, just as he said he would. Hayden reined in as he saw her, his eyes cutting across her frame like he was counting every step she'd taken to get there. You came, he said, voice low. I didn't think I would until I did, she answered. He dismounted and walked his horse the rest of the way to her. You all right? I'm not hurt. That wasn't what I asked. She looked away toward the horizon. I'm not sure what I am yet. Hayden didn't press. He simply took the bag from her shoulder and tied it behind his saddle. You'll ride with me, just till your legs settle. She nodded. When he helped her up, his hands were careful, not hesitant, just sure and quiet. They rode west. The land changed as they moved. The grass grew taller in the low spots where water held longer. Wild sage dotted the slopes, and hawks circled high above the ridges. By mid-morning, the sun had warmed the earth enough to bring out the scent of pine and old dust. Hayden didn't speak much. When he did, it was to point out a trail cut by elk or a patch of chokecherry thicket she should avoid come summer. His voice was rough-hewn but steady, like he'd spent more time with animals than people. Katherine listened, letting the silence between them stretch without needing to fill it. Near midday, they reached a narrow creek shaded by fir. A small cabin stood back from the bank, its roof patched with bark and new timber, its chimney curling faint smoke. He helped her down and untied the bag. "It's not much," he said, "but it don't leak, and it holds heat." She stepped inside. The floor was swept clean, the hearth warm, and a small cot tucked in the corner bore a quilt stitched in faded greens and browns. A second chair had been brought in, though it didn't match the first. She turned to him. "You were expecting me." "I was hoping." Hayden didn't come inside. He stood at the threshold, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the floorboards. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep in the lean-to." "You don't need to, I do." Katherine didn't argue. She set her bag down and unwrapped the bread. Her hands trembled more from the stillness than the ride. She hadn't stopped moving since the day she arrived in Dry Creek. Now there was nothing to do but stand still. Later, after she'd warmed her hands by the fire and eaten half a slice, Hayden knocked once and stepped in. "I'll need to ride into town tomorrow," he said. "Supplies are low. I'll bring back more flour, and we're short on salt." She nodded. "You trust me to stay here?" He met her eyes. "You came without being chased. That's enough for me." She didn't know what to say to that. She only nodded again. He turned to go, then paused. "You've got the fire and the door locks from the inside. No one comes out this far, but if you hear anything, I've left the rifle by the hearth. It's loaded." Katherine's gaze dropped to the long rifle propped against the stones. Her father had kept one like it, back when there'd still been a home. "Thank you," she said. That night, she lay beneath the quilt while Hayden's silhouette shifted outside through the curtain of smoke from the chimney. She could see him through the small window, seated by the fire he'd built in the lean-to, carving something from a piece of pine. She didn't sleep easy. The wind gusted hard against the cabin walls, and the creek gurgled louder than it had by day. But when she woke before dawn, the fire was still burning, and she was warm. She stepped outside, her boots crunching frost, and found him already up, coffee steaming from a tin mug. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some. There's more water heating. I'll take the horse down to the pasture. You've got time if you want to wash." She hesitated. "You're not going to ask me why I married him?" "No," he said, standing. "But if you ever want to tell me, I'll listen." As he walked toward the trees with the reins in hand, she watched the way the light caught on his shoulders. And for the first time in weeks, her breath didn't shake when she let it out. Hayden returned after 2 days. The trail had been washed out west of Eagle's Rest, and he'd waited out the rain under canvas with his saddle for a pillow. When he stepped into the cabin again, boots damp and hat pulled low against the sky, Katherine had just finished stitching up the last tear in the curtain she'd found balled in a crate near the hearth. "You hung tight," he said, setting the flour and salt on the table beside a tin of dried apples and a small crock of lard. "I kept the fire going," she said, "and the roof didn't leak." Hayden nodded once, then set about unpacking. He didn't ask what she'd done beyond that, and she didn't offer. But when he pulled a wrapped bundle from the bottom of his pack and laid it on the table, she looked up. "You mentioned rhubarb," he said. "Woman in town had a root still good. Said it'd keep if I buried it in damp soil." Katherine blinked. "I haven't tasted rhubarb since I was a girl. Figured you might want it near the window." He turned toward the door again. "Ground's soft on that side." She followed without a word, taking the root in her hands. It was ugly and gnarled, but still clung to life. He handed her the spade, and she knelt beside the cabin. The soil was dark where the snow had melted first. She set the root into the earth and pressed it down, careful not to bruise it. Hayden crouched beside her. It'll be stubborn at first. Might not bloom this spring. I can wait a season. They stayed that way a moment longer, knees in the dirt, breath curling in the morning chill. When she stood, her skirt was damp at the hem, and her hands were brown to the wrists. "You've been on your own a long time," he said, not as a question. She brushed her palms against her apron. "Since my father passed." "Mother." "She died before I could read." Hayden nodded, then stood and brushed his coat sleeve clean. "You get used to quiet when no one's waiting on you." She looked at him then. "You live alone by choice?" "Wasn't always." He didn't offer more. She didn't ask. The days stretched longer as winter eased its grip. They worked side by side without much talk. She learned the rhythm of chopping wood without bruising the heel of her hand. He showed her how to check the traps along the creek without getting her boots soaked through. She gutted a trout for the first time and didn't flinch. One evening, after they'd eaten, she pulled the quilt over her knees and stared at the fire while Hayden sharpened his knife by the door. "Do you think I was foolish to come here?" she asked. He didn't look up. "No, I didn't know him, Silas. I just believed what he wrote. You wanted something better. I thought I could build something with someone, even if we started with nothing." Hayden rested the blade against the whetstone and turned toward her. "You still can." Katherine met his eyes. He didn't look away. The next morning, she rose early and walked down to the creek with the pail. Mist clung low over the water, and the rocks were slick beneath her boots. As she dipped the pail, her eye caught a glint up the ridge. A rider. She straightened, heart thudding. The figure paused at the crest, then turned and vanished behind a bluff. Hayden was already lacing his boots when she returned. "There was a man near the ridge," she said. He stood. "Which direction?" "East side." He didn't come close. Hayden grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. She watched from the doorway as he scanned the horizon, then walked to the edge of the trees. When he came back, his jaw was tight. He was watching, not passing through. Katherine's stomach twisted. "Do you think, Silas, I'll know more by dusk?" He saddled his horse. "If I'm not back before dark, take the rifle and stay inside. Keep the fire low." She nodded. Hayden rode without a word. The hours passed slow. She didn't light the lamp when the sun dipped. She sat by the cold hearth with the rifle across her lap, listening to the wind in the eaves. Every snap of twig outside made her grip the stock tighter. Just before night swallowed the last of the sky, hooves returned. Hayden stepped through the door, his coat torn at the shoulder. His lip was split, and blood darkened the collar of his shirt. Katherine stood fast. "You're hurt." "I'm all right." "What happened?" He closed the door behind him and latched it. "It was Silas. He followed your tracks. Took him a while, but he's stubborn." She moved toward him. "Did he see you?" "Saw me. And he knows now that you chose to leave." Katherine swallowed. "He'll come." "He already did." Her breath caught. "I told him if he steps foot beyond the ridge again, he'll answer to me." She stared at the gash above his brow. "You fought him." "I made him see reason." She reached for a cloth and the basin. As she cleaned the blood from his temple, her hands steadied. "I didn't think he'd let go." "He didn't. I made him." When she finished, he caught her wrist gentle. "I'll keep you safe, no matter how long he carries that anger. I don't want to be something you protect out of duty." "You're not," he said. "I want you here." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she let herself believe it. Outside, the wind carried the smell of thawing pine. Inside, the fire rose again. They stood close, neither rushing the moment. And in the hush between them, a life began to take root. The snow gave up its hold by mid-March, peeling away from the hills like old paint. The creek ran faster, louder, carrying bits of winter off in its current. Katherine watched it from the porch each morning, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hands still from work for the first time in years. Hayden had taken to rising early and returning late, fencing in a new pasture to the north and clearing brush behind the lean-to. She offered to help, but he refused with a quiet shake of his head. "You've done enough surviving," he'd said. "Let your hands rest a while." So she filled the cabin with small things. She stitched a strip of muslin into curtains for the back window, gathered dried moss to line the cupboard shelves, and hung the cracked mirror Hayden found in an old mining camp over the basin. It reflected her with strange softness, like the glass remembered someone gentler. One evening, as the wind stirred loose needles from the pines, she set down the tin cup in her lap and looked toward the ridge. "I want to tell you something," she said, "but it's not easy." Hayden kept his eyes on the fire. "I'm listening. I was engaged once, before Silas." He didn't turn, but his hand stilled where he'd been feeding the flames. "His name was Thomas," she said. "He was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. Thought the world could be mended if enough boys learned Latin and girls learned to keep books." Hayden waited. He died of fever. 2 days before the wedding, a gust pushed smoke sideways from the chimney. She watched it trail into the dark. "I didn't come west just for a husband. I came because there was no one left to ask me to stay." Hayden looked at her then. "You don't owe me explanations. I'm not offering one. I only wanted you to know who I was before I walked into Dry Creek." He nodded once. Then, after a moment, "I knew a woman once. Her name was May." Katherine's brow lifted slightly. "She married my brother. Had a voice like creek water in summer, always running soft in the background. When he died in a stampede, she packed her things and went back east without a word." "Did you love her?" Katherine asked. "I think I wanted to, but I never had the chance." They let the silence settle between them again, comfortable as worn flannel. Then Hayden stood and fetched a bundle of tools from beneath the bench. "I've got something for you to see," he said. She followed him outside, the chill damp through her slippers. He led her past the lean-to and down the slope where the old corral used to be. A new fence circled the space now, tight-wound and sturdy. Inside it, 2 lambs stood blinking beneath the moonlight, their coats pale and ragged, their legs too long for their bodies. "I found them abandoned," he said. "Mother was dead. Figured they'd not last a week, but they've got some fight in them." Katherine knelt and offered her hand. One lamb stepped forward, lips brushing her fingers, unsure but curious. "They'll need feeding," Hayden said. "I thought maybe you'd want to." She looked up at him, the cool air threading through her hair. "You built this for them?" "For you, really. Figured you might want something of your own to see grow." Katherine rose slowly, brushing straw from her skirt. "You keep doing that." "What?" "Giving me pieces of a life without asking anything back." He met her eyes. "You can have the whole of it if you want." Her throat caught, but she didn't look away. "I want it to be ours, not something I owe you." "You don't owe me a thing," he said, "but I'd give it all the same." They stood close, nothing between them but breath and quiet. "I think I've been waiting to belong somewhere," she said. "Not to someone, just somewhere." He reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, warm from the work. "Then you've found it." She didn't answer, only stepped forward and let her forehead rest against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her so gently it nearly broke her. The lambs bleated once, too soft to break the stillness. And in the hush of new spring, beneath a sky still freckled with frost, Katherine closed her eyes and let herself believe it was real. Because it was. The lambs grew faster than expected. By late April, they were butting each other in the yard and chewing anything left within reach: rope ends, shirt hems, the corner of Catherine's apron once. She laughed when she caught them, the sound light and surprised as if she wasn't quite used to hearing it from herself. Hayden glanced up from where he was mending the porch rail. You ought to name them before they start thinking they own the place. I thought you didn't put much stock in naming animals. I don't. But you do. She leaned on the fence, watching the smaller of the two nibble at a tuft of her hair. I'll think on it. Hayden didn't push. He never did. He worked steadily beside her most days now, never crowding, never assuming. But the space between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore, it was something quiet and growing, like the rhubarb sprouting in the corner bed, stubborn and bright. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch step, hands idle for once. A folded cloth rested beside him. I've been carving in the evenings, he said, voice low. Something for you. She sat beside him, the boards warm from the day's sun. He handed her the cloth. Inside lay a small wooden box, smooth and pale, no bigger than her palm. She opened it and found a bird carved inside a sparrow, wings tucked close, head tilted just so. I saw one land on the sill the morning after you came here, he said. Figured it was a sign. Of what? That something good was waiting to begin. She turned the box over in her hands, tracing the grain with her thumb. You made this with the same knife you sharpened by the fire. He nodded. Didn't have another. Katherine closed the lid gently. I'll keep it close. That night, she lit the lamp while he washed up from the day's work. She placed the box beside the basin, near the mirror where she could see it each morning. The reflection caught her in profile, hair pinned back, cheeks a little fuller than when she'd arrived. She barely recognized herself, and yet, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was pretending. A week later, a letter arrived. Hayden returned from town with it folded into his coat pocket. Postmaster said it came nearly a month ago. Held it, thinking no one'd come to claim it. He handed it to her without a word. She unfolded it by the fire. The handwriting was sharp and familiar. Silas had signed it with a name she no longer flinched to read. He wrote that he'd sold the ranch to a cattleman from Helena, claimed he was headed toward Colorado to start over, offered nothing more. She folded it once and tossed it into the hearth. It's done, she said. Hayden didn't ask what it had said. He only laid another log on the fire and passed her a cup of tea. Later that spring, they rode out to the western ridge, where wildflowers gathered in the wind and the land fell away into painted hills. She stood with him beneath a cottonwood, the sky clear above, and took his hand. I don't want to leave this place, she said. Not ever. He turned to her. Then stay. Build it with me. Not just the land. Everything. She stepped closer, her fingers tightening around his. I want to be yours, Hayden. Not through paper or promise. Just through living. He nodded once, and his voice was rough when he answered. Then we'll live it. Every day together. They married that June beneath the same cottonwood, with only the breeze and the lambs for witness. She wore a dress she dyed with elderberry and stitched herself. He shaved for the first time in months and wore his father's vest. They didn't need a preacher, just a vow spoken low, with hands held firm and eyes steady. By autumn, the lambs were full-grown and spoiled. The rhubarb bed had doubled in size. Hayden added a second room to the cabin, just wide enough to hold a cradle and a shelf of books they began collecting one by one. Katherine read aloud in the evenings, her voice slow and even, while Hayden listened with his hands resting on her growing belly. They never spoke of the beginning, not out of shame, but because it had given way to something stronger. What they built was not a life salvaged, but one chosen, quiet, steady, and true. Years later, when neighbors passed by on their way to town, they'd point to the house with the green shutters and the fence wound round with ivy and say, That's the McAllister place. You won't find kinder folks this side of the Judith. Inside, in the warmth of the hearth, Katherine and Hayden would sit close, their chairs drawn together, a quilt across their knees, the scent of fresh bread on the air. And every evening, just before the lamp was turned down, she'd open the little wooden box and run her finger over the carved sparrow's wing, still safe, still home, just to remember how far they'd come.